Hi, and welcome back to the SecurityMetrics podcast. My name's Jen Stone. I'm one of the principal security analysts here at SecurityMetrics. Very excited about the conversation that I'm going to have today because it has to do specifically, if you're in the healthcare industry, you're going to want to know, but it applies to security in a lot of other places. So stay tuned because you'll figure out how it applies to you. Welcome, the guys from SPHER. And I might have mentioned, you guys have seen like the Help Me With HIPAA podcast. Donna Grundle's been on this show. I told you about the PriceSec boot camp, which I went and helped participate in. And the gentlemen from SPHER were there as well. It was a great training exercise episode. I don't know what you call it. It was not really a conference because it was 3.5 days of really kind of intensive training, right?
Boot camp, right?
It was a boot camp. And if you weren't there, you missed out. Plan on it next year. But let's focus on you guys for a minute. Please introduce yourselves to the audience so they know who you are, where you come from.
All right. I guess I'll go first. Hi, everybody. My name is Ray Ribble. I am one of the co-founders of SPHER Inc. A little bit of my background, since we're going to talk a little bit about SPHER Inc. later, is started my career in the aeronautical engineering industry as a designer for flight control systems of fighter jets.
Oh, cool.
I was kind of interesting, and it actually plays into SPHER, by the way. And then spent a large portion of my career living overseas, doing business in the technology industry across Asia before coming back to the United States and getting headfirst into the healthcare industry. So I've been involved in technology for well over 30 years.
Wow. Rob.
Hey, everybody. Rob Pruter. From Southern California, born and raised, one of the few. Very proud of that, by the way. I'm an Aries. That's also important.
Okay.
Been in healthcare IT for about 20-something years. Been in identity management privacy specifically for the last 10 years. It's an interesting story how I met Ray, but I was at a conference probably 7-8 years ago where the headline speaker was talking about users and systems and breaches within the PHI of users, and the 70% of theft of patient data was by insiders. And as he looked out at the crowd, he said, nobody in this room knows how to capture it, identify it, or even know it's happening. And there's no technology out there today. And I was sitting next to somebody that was actually an old friend of Ray's. And at that moment, I said, wow, I think Ray and the team have something going on there. I should probably get in contact. And that's how we met, was from a conference 7-8 years ago. And then we started SPHER into the marketplace about 2016 was when we started to actually formulate a plan to get help to everybody.
Starbucks made a lot of money off us as we courted each other because we kept meeting at a Starbucks at a local location.
Well, that's awesome. I think the reason that I was so interested in having you on to talk to you is in healthcare, you have to know who accessed specific data and when they did it. And the company that you've put together really helps with that. But I think there are a lot of other places where knowing who's accessing what data and whether they should be or not is less sophisticated or maybe less focused on than in the healthcare industry. And even in the healthcare industry, a lot of people are not doing this super well. From the assessments that I do, a lot of risk assessments in the healthcare space, and this topic specifically is not well understood, and certainly the tooling behind it is not as great as what I saw you put together, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. Well, maybe let's look at what is the kind of the problem set. Rob, you touched on it briefly, but what are people trying to do in terms of understanding who's accessing data generally, but in the healthcare space specifically?
I think one of the things that people underestimate is the value of medical data and patient data. Many people understand identity theft and theft of credit card information and that sort of thing. But you can cancel that. You can cancel credit cards. You can cancel bank accounts. You can, rejigger your financial life and kind of start over. you can't cancel your patient medical record.
Right.
It's what makes it so valuable. So when people are looking at why things are happening, why there's groups and bad actors accessing patient data, it really emanates from that, because there's so many different things they can do with it. And so as we were getting into this originally, I think there was an underappreciation to why there are folks out there looking to get into these systems and get the data. And that's kind of where we came in originally. When we were first talking about this, a lot of times we spent most of our time educating as to what was happening, but why it was happening.
Right.
Even today, I don't think people understand, like, why are people want my medical data? Why do they want my patient record?
Yeah.
I think that's how we really got into this, and why we have a passion for protecting patient data. When people ask us what we do, that's what we say. We help protect patient data.
And people ask me that all the time. Well, why would anyone want my patient data? What are they going to do with it? How do they use it in bad ways? Why is it even valuable to them? Can you speak to that maybe a little bit, Raymond?
Yeah, you can. Gotta have a whole slide that talks about that. It starts with, and something that happened to me personally was, they can use that information to file your tax returns.
Oh.
As an example, they can use that information to create phony IDs and go sell them in Echo Park in the middle of Los Angeles. They can use that data, as Rob just indicated a moment ago, to create credit cards,
right?
To do loans, to set up secondary identities for an individual or a group of individuals, and then go online and make purchases in the name of that person.
Right.
And then a subset of that, and I could just go on and on about this, is, and Rob and I talk about this a lot with people we speak with, is there's two immensely vulnerable groups within that. Why do they use those medical records? The under 18 and the over 65.
Oh, interesting. Right. Can you go into that a little more?
Just briefly, we don't want to beat everybody up on it, but what's interesting is, now we know kids today are very tech savvy, right? Mm-hmm. And tech dangerous as well, because they're using it everywhere all the time with no sense of security whatsoever, right? They'll log into anything and take a look at it, but they have an identity nonetheless. So if I can steal that individual's identity, get a hold of their social security number, and go and create an identity based on that, I can do a lot of purchases. So what we're seeing is that kids from the United States start to apply to universities at 17 years old. And one of the first things they'll do is look at financial aid. Well, they find out that they're not qualified for financial aid because there's already a whole bunch of loans out against their identity that exist in the market that they should be paying on. Yeah. And they didn't even know the debt was there. So that would be one example. The flip side of that is our population in the United States is getting older than 65 years old. They're using less technology. And they're not aware of what's happening with their identity if somebody has accessed it inappropriately and is using that. And those people maybe aren't paying as much attention to what's happening to themselves online, to use an expression. And guess what? It's being used in a bad way. So they're vulnerable because they're not looking or they're not paying attention. And somebody else is. They've got a hold of that record. And like Rob said, your medical record lasts forever. Yeah, I can take 2 years with the government and get a new social security number. It's a pain in the butt, but I can do it. I can't get a new medical record. Right. It exists. And the bad guys, let's use the dark web as an example. Well, they can use that record again and again and again. They can sell it to groups in the United States, in Canada, in Mexico. They can sell it to people over in Europe, so on and so on. Is it okay if I give you a little bit of background on why we're here?
Oh, yes, please. Tell me about why you actually created, because we kind of glossed over that, but I would love to hear about why the company exists in the first place. It sounds like the company itself is because you guys went, oh, wait, this is an amazing idea. But tell me a little more about that.
It'd be cool if that was actually what it was.
Oh, no. It was all about the coffee? Is that what you're saying? It was just you wanted to continue drinking coffee?
The coffee was great. Let's be honest. Starbucks made a lot of money off of Rabavai. That's for sure. But the best part of that story is Rob and I, when we first met, we never talked about where we lived. And it ended up that we lived around the corner from each other.
Oh, wow.
and didn't know each other. In the same community, literally, Rob, less than a mile from each other?
Oh, like a couple 100 yards.
That's wild.
We never met. So, life is funny how it brings people together. I guess the catalyst that created what we now call SPHER begins in the high-tech program. So from a healthcare perspective, when we got involved, I was running a company that won the contracts here in Southern California to do the EMR consulting and implementations under the regional extension centers.
Okay.
We did about 2,500 EMR consultations and implementations, and then help them to go through the meaningful use process as a component of that so that they can get their funds. What we found in 2,500 completions was that 0 organizations implemented any policies and procedures to protect the data now that it was in a digital market.
Oh, wow.
0, not one.
That's a painful number.
And it was scary. It was scary because we were running a business and we thought, wow, we're really exposed here because we're the organization, as a consultant, we're the organization helping them to implement this. So if there is a breach, and the word breach had already started to come out, was being discussed,
right?
What's our liability? Because we're the ones to set it up.
Yeah.
And, everybody wants to pass the buck. So are we going to be the guys that they pass the buck to? So that became part of the catalyst that led to us saying, well, how do we solve this problem of protecting digital patient data now that we've moved it out of on the wall and behind a locked door to on premise in a server or in the cloud, right? Because obviously cloud computing became a big thing for a lot of doctors who probably never even knew cloud computing prior to moving to high tech. Fair enough?
Yeah.
And by the way, they were really not interested in hearing all this techno babble.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
We needed to just give them a solution to a potential problem.
Right.
And again, I'll go back to what Rob said. Most of the clients, when we spoke to them in the early years, was HIPAA, SMIPA. HIPAA police really don't exist. They're not out there. And by the way, Ray, in the history of my business, I've never been breached.
We still hear that. We still hear, it's never been a problem. We still hear, is this really something that I have to care? Why are you trying to make me afraid? What are you trying to sell me this time? Oh,
absolutely. And they truly believe that because, look, I love the doctors and I have a lot of respect for them. But unfortunately, they don't have a lot of respect for me because I'm not the guy they're golfing with. And the guy they're golfing with is another doctor. And unfortunately, that doctor tells them, we've never had a problem with that either.
Oh,
I have a consensus already.
Yeah.
All the guys I golf with have never had a breach. So why am I going to go spend any kind of money? Forget high or low, any kind of money to implement a solution that really has no value to me because I have nothing to worry about. Right?
Well,
it's hard to become that hurdle.
And what's frustrating is that in the healthcare space, and maybe you've seen this as well, there is not a central reporting that tells people. For a lot of my listeners know PCI. They're very familiar with if you have a breach of cardholder data, the payment brands know about it. Your acquirer knows about it. And a lot of times the merchant is the one that is told by the acquirer, hey, we believe you have a breach just because of patterns that they're seeing in the data and the use of the fraudulent actions in the data. And so there is a kind of a centralized way to say, look, we know that this data is out there and we know that it probably comes from your systems. Let's go fix it. HIPAA, healthcare data, doesn't have a central view on things. So it's really the responsibility becomes distributed and the visibility in a distributed system is not there in the same way. So people might think that they've never had a breach, but they could be wrong because they haven't even been looking for it.
Well, I think you hit on the one of the challenges in healthcare is that as a patient, and we talk about this a lot with the kind of the patient ecosystem.
Yeah.
So you have a hospital, you have the general practitioner, you've got the specialists that hang off the general practitioners in different offices. You've got pharmacies, labs, imaging centers, hospitals, surgery centers. And that's all just for one patient, for one procedure that got referred out between all of those different entities with that same exact patient data flowing through different systems all across that. They wouldn't even know if they were breached. So when we talk about providers who say, "Oh, it's never happened to me," they have no idea. The average discovery time on breaches is over 200 days, and it's by a third party usually.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that the physicians and some of these provider groups and clinics just don't even get. They probably they've been breached, they just don't know it.
Yeah.
And let's add to that what Rob is saying. The average number of people that will look at your medical record in a small organization is 5. When you get into a large hospital group, it's over 50.
Yeah.
When you take the extended ecosystem that you described, Jen, it gets to well over 100 people.
Yeah.
And then go back to what Rob said at the beginning. 70% of all of the breaches that occur in the United States are from people within the organizations.
Right.
So if you have 100 people looking at it, you have a 70% chance that one individual might do something nefarious.
Right.
And you only need one.
Exactly. And you hate to say, hey, the people that to the people in healthcare, hey, the people you're working with probably are going to cause you a problem, because no one wants to believe that of the people that they're working with. But the more people have to have access, a lot of times, especially when we're talking like you just described, the doctor and the specialist and then their assistants and then their admin, and you look at that and the healthcare world says, hey, we need all these people to have access to look at this. And it's hard to, kind of say who needs access. So we're just going to open it up so people can do their jobs, right? And I get that. People need to be able to have access, especially in healthcare. But then that adds that complexity of, well, who's actually looking at it? And how do we know?
And what's their state of mind? I think one of the things we hear a lot is, well, I know my people. They're good people.
Yeah.
And they might be, your experience has been good. When you hired them, they were good people.
Yeah.
But you never understand sometimes the life changes that happen behind the scenes. And we have multiple stories of folks that have had hardship in their life or financial problems or the bad influences around them. And all of a sudden they're grabbing that record to be a fake patient. They'll impersonate patients.
Yeah.
They'll go to multiple doctors to get, oxycodone prescriptions.
Yep.
So they can sell them. They can sell them on the open market. And you, as a patient, all of a sudden one day have a collection agency hounding down your back because you haven't paid for your prescriptions, your office visits, and all these things. And you're like, I don't even know these patients, these providers. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
You have a collection agency, ready to, turn your life upside down. So
yeah.
And I think it gets extended there too. We heard when we were at the conference at the boot camp, the one individual who talked about the business associate who is responsible for the breach, right? Yeah. So it's not always the actor that you might think it is. It may not be your primary care physician's office or even the hospital you're at. It could be one of those ancillary organizations who has access to your medical record that actually stole the data. So as the patient, how am I going to know? How would I find out? And who's looking to make sure that it is safe? LifeLock isn't going to solve that problem for you, by the way.
No, it's not. No. And then you add to that another avenue, which is the Medicare fraud. People are taking these and the government is just spending the money on something that's not even being supplied to someone because it's somebody's taken records and set up a fake account and, oh, hey, give us this money for treating these people using a fake doctor and fake patients, and all the money is going in places that it shouldn't be going.
We're very popular in Florida because Florida has a lot of that.
Yeah, I think this is why we got into the business, right? Why are we, out there in the marketplace working with groups? Is because we are passionate about the fact you just need to keep a watch and look for patterns and look for things that and surface them early, right? I mean, that's the biggest thing about all this is the quicker you find out about these anomalies, these things that are happening, the better it is for the group, for the practice, for the hospital. And that's the reason we were born, if you will, is to basically surface these things very quickly. And it's not always that the people within the group are, doing nefarious things. Sometimes it's from pure boredom, but also it's bad actors that have now come in and are impersonating users and now causing some trouble that way. And that's probably an area that we see a lot of activity these days. And so, we cover all of that.
Let me go back full circle. I don't think I finished it for our listeners. So why did we build SPHER?
Yeah.
Why did we build this product? Okay. Rob and I took a look at this and we started talking about it, and we realized that there was a necessity to know who was looking at your medical records.
Right.
Not just from a covered entity physician's office perspective, but from a patient perspective. And then if you look at what HIPAA says, we want to have user activity monitoring and system activity monitoring, and we want a process in place that tells us, is that data being kept safely?
Yeah.
I'm not quoting, I'm giving you a rough idea of
For
what
sure.
it says.
Yeah.
Right? So we started to look at, well, how are you going to do that? Is there any technology that would make that easy for those 2,500 clients that we had originally to do that? And the answer was no. There was nothing that existed in the market that even remotely got close to looking at, and not the network, get a little technical here, not the network, the actual application, because that's where the data sits, is in the application. There's a database attached to that app. It's pulling that data. And that data, the way we look at it, it's the audit log data. Because the audit log tells us who went in, who logged out, how long they were there, what records did they look at, what were they working on in a day. And from that audit log, I can pretty much tell you what the performance of an individual is on a day-to-day basis. Right? So we said, okay, how do we get that data? Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lines of data every day that are generated. Do all the analytics on that to determine whether or not the individual who's logged in is who they say they are. That's a big question. And then that they're looking at the data they should be looking at in order to provide care to the patient.
Right.
So as Rob said, the goal is just to protect patient data so that when somebody's in your office visiting you in what I like to say their most vulnerable state, we don't go to them because we're really happy and healthy. We go to them because we don't feel well and we need care.
Yeah. And
when I'm there, I'm worried about whatever is causing me pain, right? And I want you to ease that pain. So prescribe something, give me a specialist, do whatever you need to do. I'm not thinking about my digital data and is it going to be safe or not safe.
Right.
And if you shove some forms in front of me and say, sign these or we won't provide care to you, guess what I'm going to do?
Sign them.
I'm going to sign them.
Yeah.
Right? I'm going to sign them. But that doesn't mean that it's protected.
Right.
That came up, I think Donna mentioned that at the conference. It doesn't mean it's protected. It just means that they've checked the box and given you a form to sign.
Yeah.
So we looked at this and we said, what could we do to solve that problem? And what we determined was there was technologies that were available that could be coupled together. And this is artificial intelligence and machine learning. And we could build a model that would read the data coming from the audit log every day, understand who has credentials to see that data, and start to look at Jen, Rob, and Ray and say, okay, they all log in at 8 o'clock, they all log off at 5 o'clock. Jen's in the back office. She's doing billing. So she looks at no less than 100 records a day. Rob's in the front office. He looks at 100. But Ray is a specialist over on the side, and he sees maybe 10 people a day. So if Ray looks at 100 records in one day, that should be a signal to somebody that Ray's probably doing something very different. It could be an assignment he was given, or it could be that Ray's up to something not good.
Sure.
Right? We just want to know that so that we can investigate that and determine whether or not that is good or bad. I'm keeping these things simple. And that's what SPHER does. SPHER looks at 100% of all of the data every day for every user, or you could look at it the other way, for every patient that comes into your office, and tells you whether or not there is any anomaly associated with the way that moved through the process in the office, and brings it to your attention so that you can do an investigation and determine if there actually was any breach that might have occurred. 9 times out of 10, not actually 99 times out of 100, the answer is no. But it's that one that you want to catch, and that's what we do. Since we started our product, we've captured over 1,400 breaches that have occurred in our customer base.
That's amazing.
Right?
You've been really good about keeping this non-technical, which I really appreciate, because although we do have quite a few technical people who listen, we also have people who are like, oh, I don't understand what you're saying about the network traffic right now.
Right.
But what I would love to hear is maybe some more examples of how do people use this to know that the right people are looking at information and the wrong people are stopped from looking at information because it's detected.
Yeah. So in our dashboard of events, what the users go through is they'll take a look at some of the activity that we flag. Now we're capturing all of the logs and all the data. And so you can run a lot of different types of looks in general as well. But there's a couple of things that we flag right off the bat. So every time we go live, two things flag immediately. One, self-examination, which is people in their own records. And two is what we call relative snooping. And it just happens 100% of the time we flag this immediately. And people, they don't believe when I tell them that. But so give me an example. We had a case out of Arizona where the office manager of this practice, and it was a smaller type cardiology practice, I think 6 doctors, 35 people.
Okay.
Not huge. But by the way, these are the targets of the bad actors now. These smaller entities are actually where they're going first because there's less hardened surfaces on the outside of these entities, right?
Right.
So they're going to the softer targets. But the person who ran the practice knew intuitively, she's like, I know there's something going on here. I can't quite figure it out. When we went live with them, they found out that one of the people within their practice was in their own record prescribing themselves drugs. They not only had a problem, well, they had 3 problems. One, how did this person get authentication capability to prescribe themselves drugs?
Right.
2, they had a criminal issue because they were doing this in multiple physician practices all over through Arizona.
Oh, wow.
And they had a HIPAA problem as well. And so that's the sort of thing where we get that a lot. Like they know stuff's going on, and typically in a practice that size, there's probably 50,000 lines of user activity per day. And that is impossible for anyone to scan the zeros and ones that are in an auto log like we do with our technology and then have any clue that there's something going on. And so we like to talk about, when SPHER comes in, we help create a culture of compliance. If people know they're being watched, they tend to do the right thing. Because I don't think everybody is always just out there to cause trouble. I think a lot of times they're just bored. And so, and we have multiple examples where, so we talk about what happened in Chicago with the actor who went into Northwestern Hospital and was claiming all sorts of stuff. But when the actor went into the emergency department, 36 people looked at his record. They didn't know about it for weeks and weeks and weeks. And it was only after TMZ or somebody published some data out of his emergency room visit that they actually go back through and look at the logs. Well, they had to fire 36 people. Now, most of these people were just bored, right? They didn't. They saw an actor come in. There's a celebrity. They saw an opportunity to kind of get some inside dirt. But if they had known they were being watched or their activity was being watched, they may not have done it, and they may not have been fired, and the hospital wouldn't have to hire a bunch of new. It's very expensive, just from that alone. And so that's kind of what we talk about. And there's so many instances where we come into a situation where we had a group out of Los Angeles where a former employee was trying to access the system, and we flagged it. And what we helped them identify was the fact that their termination processes were all screwed up. They terminated an employee. They denied him access of the EMR. But when they tried to get into the EMR and we flagged it for failed login attempts, they also surfaced the fact that they hadn't deleted them out of their network.
Yeah.
So through VPN access out of a whole different state, they were accessing into the network to gain access to the EMR. And so it's just things like that are pretty interesting.
And that was an employee who had been dismissed 3 years prior.
Oh no. And still had access. And I think the other interesting part was from another state. And so a lot of times people don't realize that, we're so interconnected now that getting access, regardless of where you are, can be a problem. And then, but not all, and I would say actually most healthcare organizations don't have the right tooling in place to know when somebody's logging in from someplace else and alert them on that, let them know that this person isn't even, they don't even go here, right?
Well, think about that example that Rob just gave you, and why this person could do this. I think it's interesting. Maybe I'm morbid in the sense, but they knew what the convention that was being used for passwords.
Mm-hmm.
They knew what the emails of the employees look like. First name dot last name at such and such. Okay, so they probably could take a wild guess. And this is what we always tell people. SPHER isn't assuming that your employees are bad. What we're worried about, what I worry about for my clients, is that somebody's going to get a hold of your credentials and use your credentials to get in your system. Because as great as technology is, it doesn't know if you are or aren't you based on the login and password.
Yeah.
Right? So if they can log in as Ray Ribble, then they have all the access that Ray Ribble has.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm a senior executive in a large healthcare organization, I have really good access. Right? And so I can go look at a lot of different things. That's what we're looking for. And the abnormality will be that the person who's looking to steal won't know how you use the system. And that'll get flagged through our technology, and the way you move through the application to get to that pot of gold will be very different than the way the person who normally uses the application. And we bring that to your attention so that you can take action within 24 hours and shut that down and stop that. Because as Rob said, 200, 300 days later, you don't want to be told by some third party, oh, by the way, you got breached.
Right.
And now you have 15 or 60 days to go solve this problem.
So what Rob was saying earlier about somebody had a feeling something wasn't right, do you see that? That's why people come to you. They kind of feel like something's not right, and they want the tooling, or how do people, engage with you?
Yeah, I think I always say there's three reasons why people come to us. One of them, or all three of them. One, compliance issues, right? They have to do this as a statute. So, user activity review, documentation, all the stuff that's required under HIPAA. It's in the security risk assessment that they do every year. And so we get a lot of the kind of compliance stuff. We also have the kind of risk mitigation strategy. There's a lot of civil lawsuits that are happening now that the attorneys have figured out a way to pass personal protection privacy laws nationwide, which are extended beyond HIPAA, and it's allowing them to file class action lawsuits. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of risk managers that are saying you got to engage in best practices and set your system up for to catch things like this. And I think even cyber liability insurance companies are starting to require this as well. But the third reason, and probably what brings folks to us in general, is employee snooping. There's just an issue out there today where people are concerned that people within these entities are looking at stuff they shouldn't look at. Neighbors, friends, family. And I think that for a long time, it was kind of accepted that, it was okay, look at these sort of things, and not really, again, trying to do it because they have bad intentions, but a lot of times they do. I mean, we have a situation in Ohio where a physician looked at his ex-wife's new husband's record so he could exfiltrate data about his behavioral health issues in a custody filing in order to gain custody of his children and financial advantage.
Oh, no.
And so it's things like that sometimes people don't really think about. And that's why the information is so valuable. We see things, and the FBI sees things on a daily basis that people just don't understand are happening. And it's not to scare everybody. It's just to say, if you set up, basic, best practice from a technical standpoint, you can prevent most of this from ever happening. And that's the thing. And that's what, the OCR investigator said at the boot camp. We're not here to destroy you. We want you to just do the right thing so that, you can protect patient data as best you can.
Another thing that I hear a lot is, well, I don't care if people see what my data is. It's not going to, it doesn't matter to me who sees it. But they don't understand that seeing it means affecting it, and affecting it can mean the difference between, let's say you have an allergy to a certain medication, and that person has malicious intent against you and takes out that information about your allergy to a common medication. Well, what if you're hospitalized and then get that medication, and then you have some pretty serious or critical health effects because of that information is missing because of someone else's malicious intent. And so we don't like to think about these things from other people. Other people would do these things to us, and yet this is something that we see over and over again.
I heard there was legislation that's being brought forth for the United States just yesterday that they want to improve the technology around medical devices, specifically with pacemakers, because the bad guys have figured out a way to interrupt the pacemaker.
Yeah.
So to your example, take it to the other direction. What if I, as a nefarious individual, wanted to create heart attacks?
Yeah.
All I need to do is break into whatever machine Cedars-Sinai or somebody is using, go in, tamper with that signal, and everybody who's attached to that signal, I can go and do bad things to and cause a lot of problems really fast, right? And unfortunately, there's just too many strange individuals out there that might find that fun.
Yeah.
Well, you have nation state actors, right? If I have a infusion pump in any particular hospital, there'll be hundreds of infusion pumps around the hospital that are connected to the network. They've actually demonstrated this. You can get into an infusion pump and start changing dosage or the pathway of drugs into people's systems, just to cause panic, right? Just to cause trouble. I think that's. You mentioned something else that's kind of interesting. If your medical record is corrupted when you are in the hospital for whatever the procedure is, now they have inaccurate information.
Yeah.
Right. And so how does that affect the quality of care at the point of care? It's a big issue potentially, and that's why it's so important to protect that data.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And again, what we're promoting isn't to replace technology at the network level. We think we work hand in hand as part of a much larger cybersecurity framework.
Yes.
In that you're looking at the network and you're looking at the application. And Rob's point is really important. And that is, there's not just one system, the EMR. Mm-hmm. You might have 10, 15, 20. A hospital has over 50 different systems that are all contain PHI and can be accessed remotely, that can be used against a patient or against an organization.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to protect. That's what we're trying to make sure that they know who has access to that information, and is that individual doing and using that system the way that's appropriate for their roles and responsibilities.
Right. I really appreciate the stories and the conversation, the examples, because we're not trying to scare people. This is that It's not about that, but it is about, sometimes we hear, like you said, HIPAA schmippa. We hear HIPAA and people say, it's just this, thing I have to abide by, but really understanding that there are real world consequences to not taking it seriously, the cybersecurity side of things, the enforcement of that privacy can really have actual effects. And I know that in the healthcare world, people truly care about the health and well-being of the people that they serve. And so being aware of this can maybe help people make additional decisions about how to protect that information. Well, thank you so much for being here and joining me today. Is any final comments before we wrap this up?
I was on a call with someone from the boot camp. They have a kind of a medical practice where they kind of are remote and they move around a lot throughout parts of the United States. And he said, I got to meet so many people at the boot camp and experts. He just gave me peace of mind. It wasn't so much that they were trying to sell me stuff or all that. He goes, I just knew, I met all these people. I knew who to go to.
Yeah.
And whether it's Cardin or Jen, it's SecurityMetrics. It's just, everybody seemed to have a huge interest in helping with their expertise, not necessarily, trying to just jam down product and make a bunch of money. It was really like, no, we're going to do just fine from a business standpoint, but we truly want to help. And whenever I'm we're talking to people, I always say, look, we need to figure out how to get this into your environment because it's so important.
Yeah.
And, business is important, but protection is also really important as our passion. So that's all I have to say about that.
Exactly.
Well said. Yeah.
Well, thank you again so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And I think what you bring, especially to the healthcare world, is very valuable. And I hope that people find a lot of value in hearing what you had to say today.
Well, thank you for having us, Jen. We really
great to be on. Thanks so much.
Thanks for watching. To watch more episodes of SecurityMetrics podcast, click on the box on the left. If you prefer to listen to this podcast, it's available on all your favorite podcast platforms. See you on the slopes.